Well, I was sitting in the kitchen last week, and a friend of mine called on my phone asking if he could borrow our Ford Flex. He didn't say why he needed it, and I didn't want to appear nosy, because if there's one thing I'm not, it's nosy. So I just said, sure, use it as long as you need to, come get it. And a bit later, I was looking out the window, the kitchen window, and I saw him hurrying up our driveway, glancing all around, scurrying along the way you do when you've broken something and want to get away quickly before someone notices. I could tell just by the way he was walking and looking around that he didn't want to talk with me. But later that day, I was at Larry's gas station there in Danville getting the oil changed in our other car, and I noticed my friend's car up on the lift being worked on. There were a bunch of mechanics standing around it, and I knew it was serious because they were looking at their service manuals, and you know how messed up something has to be for men to look at directions. And even though it was none of my business, I asked Larry what was wrong with my friend's car, and he just shook his head and said, everything that could possibly be wrong with a car is wrong with that car. It is the worst vehicle ever made. And I was surprised to hear Larry say that, because my friend was always bragging about his car, saying it was the best car he had ever owned, urging me to buy one just like it, that I wouldn't regret it. A few days later, my friend brought our car back, and before I could even ask him about his car, he started talking about my car. He said, I didn't know you had that many miles on your car. You ought to sell it while it's still worth something and buy a car like mine. It's the best car I've ever had. I didn't tell him I'd seen his car at Larry's. For the same reason, I don't tell Jehovah's Witnesses they're wacky when they knock on my door. Once someone is convinced they found the perfect car, the true religion, the honest politician, there's no dissuading them. We've been talking about the importance of acknowledging our missteps, of those moments in Quaker history that in hindsight weren't so bright. We Friends are eager often to applaud the virtues of our spiritual ancestors, and they did many things well, but it's just as important to be mindful of our historical shortcomings so we don't repeat them. Healthy religions are never afraid of scrutiny. And so we've called this sermon series, What in the World Were We Thinking? One of Quakerism's historical errors was assuming that because we found meaning and purpose in silence, everyone else would too. Not unlike my friend who, convinced he'd found the perfect car, wanted everyone else to buy one too. But just because something works for us doesn't mean it works for everyone. In 1829, Quakers in Philadelphia, wanting to rehabilitate inmates, designed a prison, the Eastern State Penitentiary, which would isolate inmates, removing them from each other's negative influences. Friends believed that silence and isolation would help inmates reflect on their lives and inspire them to change their ways. Because silence had been helpful to us, we believed it would be good for everyone. Unfortunately, it turned out that solitary confinement had a catastrophic effect on some inmates, driving them to insanity and even suicide. It didn't occur to us that what felt like a blessing to us might be a burden for others. Our biases, when imposed on others, always exact a toll. When my grandfather was 13, his father went to his school one day and checked him out of school for good and sent him to work in a factory. His father had done the same thing to him, and he told my grandfather, "Be glad you don't have to go to school anymore. It's a waste of time." But all it did for my grandfather was make him sad, because he loved school and wanted nothing more to attend college, which he finally did at the age of 62, after the factory he worked in closed. But he never forgot his life from the age of 14 to 62, which he referred to as his wasted years. Never forget that what feels like a blessing to us might to others be a burden. Believing the best way to discover meaning and purpose was to sit silently. It didn't occur to those Pennsylvania friends that other people might find meaning and purpose in music, in art, in literature, in nature, in human intimacy, in friendships, in travel, in work, and God forbid, even sacraments. It never occurred to them. The presumption that just because something works well for us, it will surely work well for others, is still a common misperception. I was talking with my younger brother this week, trying to persuade him. He's 61 years old. He spent his entire life living in an apartment in the city. And I found myself telling him that if he really wanted to be happy, he needed to buy a farm in the country. Years ago, I had a Quaker minister friend who had been a pastoral minister for close to 20 years. And he, in a meeting with his fellow ministers, announced that he was leaving pastoral ministry, that he was going to become a doctor, go to medical school and become a doctor. And of course, we could not wait for him to leave the gathering so we could talk about him behind his back, which we did. We all agreed he was making a huge mistake because he was a really good pastor, and besides, he was too old to start over, that he wouldn't like it, and we predicted his ruination. But he applied to medical school, to our shock was accepted, and became a doctor anyway. As it turns out, an excellent physician. I was talking with a mutual friend not long ago about him. I said, you know, I bet he wishes he were still a Quaker pastor. And our friend said, you know, I don't think so. I see him pretty regularly, and he really loves being a doctor. Of course, I was sad to hear that. I hate it when people enjoy things I think they shouldn't. I had a friend, Jerry. He's one of my best friends. He lives down the street from me. I called him last week, and the background on the phone sounded very unfamiliar. And I said, where in the world are you? He said, I took my daughter, and we went to Las Vegas. I said, are you crazy? Las Vegas? You're going to get hooked on gambling? You're going to hang out with the wrong kind of people? You're going to ruin your life. You need to come home immediately. But they didn't. They stayed there for 3 extra days. And then he came home. I saw him. I said, how was your time in Las Vegas? He said, oh, it was wonderful. We had a great time. But I know he's lying. and that they'll die and go to hell. I just know it. Of course, something else might happen. I might learn that just because I fear something doesn't mean everyone else should. I might learn that what makes me happy might make someone else miserable. I might learn that the very thing that sets me free might feel like chains to another. How much lovelier our world would be, how much happier we all would be if we each of us followed our high and holy leadings and were content to let others follow theirs.